Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude Magazine, and you are listening to Attitude's ADHD Experts. Today we're talking about learning disabilities and attention deficit disorder. You may be surprised to learn that as many as 70% of people with attention deficit disorder also suffer from one or more learning disabilities, such as reading difficulties, dyslexia, language processing disorders, problems with math, and so forth. So diagnosing and managing learning disabilities can make it really difficult and complicated to deal simultaneously with diagnosing and treating attention deficit disorder. I am extremely pleased today to welcome Dr. Nancie Payne. She's the president of the board of directors of the Learning Disabilities Association. That's LDA. It is a wonderful organization, over 50 years old, with chapters in many states and a terrific website that's recently been redesigned. Please check it out. It's LDA America, so there are two A's in that. It sometimes confuses me, LDAA, MERICA.org. And find out if there is a support group near you, find out the resources that are available. I think you will be surprised to learn how much wonderful work LDA does. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Payne. Thank you so much again for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I am really excited about this, and I'd just like to share a couple things to kind of frame our conversation and some of your questions. I'll talk about comparing ADHD and LD characteristics of LD, and getting an evaluation for LD, and then managing LD, and then a little bit about self-esteem, which could be a whole webinar in and of itself. The comparison of ADHD and LD has been rather murky. There are lots of professionals out there who believe that ADHD and LD are one and the same. So with the gracious information from Dr. James Kohler, University of Missouri, when you have ADHD, it's a performance piece. You have the skill, but it's difficult to perform because you can't control the performance. And usually it's because you can't control the performance in someone else's environment. If you can do it on your own and in your own way, frequently it works very well, as many of you probably know. On the learning disability side, it's skill deficiency. It's really a cognitive disorder that is affecting the application or the understanding and application of particular skills. And you just don't have the ability to absorb it. And again, typically in the way that it's being taught. So there's some changes that have to happen there. ADHD, we all know, has some regulation needs. It's difficult to regulate. Inhibition is not always the greatest thing. We talk without filtering sometimes. LD is a deficiency. It's knowing what to do, but not being able to do it. The next piece, there are four of these comparisons. The next piece is ADHD is really a problem in the execution of behavior. You often know the problem, but you're not sure about the solutions. It's really hard to sort through things, and you think you did the right thing. And I had one gentleman who was on a work site, and he was muttering out loud, and the customer who was sitting close happened to hear him. He was repairing some equipment, happened to hear him and decided that he didn't know what he was doing. Well, he was just muttering out loud because he wasn't filtering and wasn't muttering in his brain instead of out loud. And it actually created some ramifications for him. For learning disabilities, people have comprehension difficulties. They're confused about what to do next, even sometimes where to start. We've all been in a situation, those of you who are parents, you probably have children who are in situations where they know what they're supposed to do, they know what the outcome is, but they have no clue as to where to start. What's step one, what's step two? Once you help them get through those things, then frequently they're able to do that. ADHD affects cognition in the way that it's a chemical imbalance in the neurotransmitters. And so it affects the nervous system functions, which is why concentration and focus and distraction are thwarted, as I say. I happen to have dyslexia, and I also happen to have a little bout of ADHD, and I can tell you that there are frequent times where I listened to something and I thought I got it all, and I didn't get it all. And I've gotten, in my old age, not really old, but in my old age, I've gotten to the point where I just ask, I didn't catch that. Can you tell me more? That's really hard for children. And then from a learning disability sense, we know that it affects cognition, but it affects cognition in processing and reasoning and achievement. It affects recreation because social skills are affected. If we have processing and reasoning difficulties, we sometimes don't have strong relationships, or we're not able to create good recreational protocols. Susan mentioned, and I'll just mention it again for everyone, that of the 100% diagnosed with ADHD in some clinical trials through the University of Missouri, 70% also had learning disabilities. That doesn't go the other way, by the way. When you have a learning disability, the number of those with ADHD is more about 30 to 35%, as we can tell from research. But what happens is, as a parent, you might take your child to a pediatrician or a specialist in ADHD, and they say, "Oh, yep, ADHD. Let's use some medication, and or let's use some particular treatment approaches, and then we'll see how that works." And everybody believes that that child is good to go. And everybody also believes that the behaviors that are exhibited or the characteristics that are exhibited are directly related to the ADHD, when in fact, given this data, they could be directly related to the learning disability. So the learning disability kind of gets submerged below the sand, so to speak, and doesn't get focused on. And sometimes when you say to a professional, "I wonder if there's a learning disability," they go, "Oh, no, we just have to play around with the medication a little more." I'm not trying to be flippant here, but we just have to play around with the treatment or the medication, or, we just have to put some strategies in place so your child concentrates more, or so an adult concentrates more. So I think that's a really telling statement. Types of learning disabilities and symptoms that you might have that might make you think you have LD. There are 5 major learning disabilities. And those 5 major learning disabilities are reading and dyslexia. And, just because slides, if you put too much on them, they get overloaded. And I know for me, I don't want to read something that's a whole lot of stuff. So the symptoms of reading and dyslexia affect comprehension. It affects comprehension of information. It affects comprehension or understanding of text that I'm reading. It's difficult to track the words in a sequence, and by the time a child, particularly a child, gets through all of the words that they need to say, there's no flow or fluency, as we might call it. And so the comprehension is just not there. And that's one of many, many things. I don't want you to think that dyslexia is a reversal of letters or numbers, although it does occur, but it is not the only symptom. There are many symptoms. And I think we could sum it up by saying that there's a difficulty in understanding, and if you can't understand, then you can't move forward to the next level or to the next point in learning. And I don't know about you, but if I miss a point and everybody's going lickety-split, I get frustrated, and then I shut down, and then I don't really care. I have friends who can remember all sorts of things from school, and I don't remember any of that. I have to go look it up. I did learn how to look it up. That's the important thing. I know how to get to the information. Then there's math. By the way, just throw this in there quickly. For adults, they would typically be diagnosed with a reading disorder or math disorder or writing disorder. And for children, frequently diagnosed with dyslexia or dyscalculia or dysgraphia. So I gave you both of the types there. So math, it's not just a case of being able to organize and add and subtract and multiply and divide. Math is really getting to places on time, organizing, sequencing, putting things in an order, following directions in step-by-step formats, making things so that they are spatially appropriate, spatially oriented. I just did a training yesterday, and I had the adults that were there, we were folding paper airplanes. So that's a spatial piece, even if you have all the directions. And, it's really a spatial process. And, we didn't call anybody out, but there were some adults who had difficulty folding paper airplanes. So you think about what you're asking your young person to do, or as an adult, what you're expecting that you'll do. Math also affects reading the numbers on a spreadsheet, understanding the concept of numbers. There's just a whole lot there. I think we spend a lot of time on dyslexia. I think we miss some things in dyscalculia. And by the way, just a little extra here. If you have a reading disorder or dyslexia, then when you're learning math word problems, the dyslexia is going to get in the middle of it. It may not be a math problem. It may be that the reading problem is there. And the same with writing. You may be able to write, but it's the dyslexia that's getting in the way of being able to write. So, and that takes us to writing, or dysgraphia, which is just writing papers, writing notes, making sure that forms are completed. I don't know about any of you, but those of you who have learning disabilities and ADHD, or think you have learning disabilities and know you have ADHD, forms are just overwhelming. When people do forms, they have to do number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and then they have to stop. And then maybe go back and do the next 5 and then stop. When they get overwhelmed, they have to just mark their place and leave it alone and de-stress, because doing that is very difficult. The other thing that's very difficult in writing is getting the thoughts from your brain to the paper. I can't tell you how many times when I was writing my dissertation, I had the thought in my brain, and by the time I got to the computer and I was word processing frantically, I would forget the thought, and it wouldn't come back. It's just gone. It might come back later, but it's not there, and it's very frustrating at that point. There's a oral expression language area. So this is an individual who has difficulty with group interaction, being able to repeat what somebody said, being able to ask a question or provide an answer, having a discussion with one person or a group of people. Very, very difficult to do that. And this one happens not only in classrooms and work situations, but also in recreational situations and on the playground and other things. So we always teach everybody. I'm saying we, as all of you out there, I'm sure you teach people to paraphrase. If you're not quite sure, paraphrase or repeat what you heard or say, this is what I think you said. But students, young people, and adults who have oral expression and language difficulties are not going to be able to do that. Hidden within this is what we would call auditory processing. And auditory processing is not a hearing, physical hearing problem. It's the inability of the information as it enters the reasoning and processing system, the neurological system or nervous system, to be organized in a functional way for accuracy and for use. So sometimes auditory processing gets lost in this one. And then there's that one that is what we call receptive oral. So that's, I hear it differently, so I say it differently. This is very interesting because this is the This is the area where a child will say a word and they'll say it the way they think they heard it, which is not correct. And then somebody will chuckle or laugh, or the teacher will say, oh, that's not correct. Let me tell you what's correct. What they received in their brain is not what was said. Sometimes words that are similar, and I'll use, just if you were talking about construction, and one of your students heard, or one of your children heard, instruction instead of construction, they might be saying to you, I need to do a science project and I need to instruct somebody in that science project. And what they really should be saying is that they need to construct a science project. Now, it's not always rhyming words, but there are some little glitches there. And then what that does is it affects the individual's ability to go from the specific understanding to the general. So if you are an adult, I'll go to adult side this time. If you're an adult and you are concerned about the fact that you're not able to understand the global picture, the abstract picture, it could be that this is going on. You're not pulling all the information in, and it's not processing. Now, I know one of the things that we talked about covering was getting evaluated for LD. I could talk about getting evaluated for LD forever and ever, but I'm just going to give you two major things that are important. You need a qualified professional. If you call somebody and they say, oh yeah, I can evaluate your child in 2 hours, they're not qualified. Most of the professionals that school psychologists and clinical psychologists and neuropsychologists that I work with work multiple hours. And in those states that it is required, you need somebody that's certified or licensed or works under the umbrella of a university program or a clinical program, and really does understand the process. There's a difference between assessing children and assessing adults. Adults have their whole menu of stuff that they've already done. And children are not quite sure about that, although they give pretty darn good information. Valid assessment tools. There's always a clinical interview. There's always an intellectual capacity, so that's a IQ test. There's always a full achievement test, not a little simple achievement test, but a full achievement test. And then information processing tests. What does the visual processing look like? What does auditory processing look like? And et cetera. The reason you want all of those is because you do a comparison of what those equate to and where the disability might be affecting the person. Then a couple things, steps to manage LD. I'm going to focus on two things that I think are absolutely critical. One is know your strengths. Have your children know their strengths. You know your strengths. Focus on your strengths. And then I put a little acronym together, a little strategy. Perception. What's your perception of yourself and others? And how do you present yourself? What's your expression? And what's your reflection? What's your self-evaluation? What we know is a lot of times people put themselves down. They don't know their strengths. They can tell you all the things that don't work, but they don't know their strengths well enough to be able to respond when asked. And there's some other things that are on there you may have questions about. And then I know that you want questions to be asked, so we'll do that last slide, and that's just keeping self-esteem above the water. Holy smokes, if you've got ADHD and you've got LD and you don't have a plethora, if I could use that word, of techniques and services and help, and I know parents are just as supportive as all get out, but children get wise to that and they go, but you're my mom or you're my dad, that's why you're supportive. For adults, sometimes it's a friend. It's use the accommodations and strategies. I can't tell you how many people think that if they use an accommodation, it's cheating. No, sir. It's no different than somebody using a wheelchair. So use the accommodations and strategies. Develop a strong understanding of yourself and have a really strong respect and value of yourself. And that's kind of hard sometimes when your environment, especially for adults, when your environment has not been the most positive. You may have gotten interesting comments from teachers or from parents or from friends. You may have few friends. And so it's pretty hard to keep that respect and value up there, but there are lots and lots of support groups and programs that are out there that will help you with that. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Susan. I think she's going to facilitate the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you so much, Nancie. That was great introduction. And I'm really, I shouldn't say I'm surprised, but the evidence here in the questions is clear that there is a lot of confusion between LDs and ADDs. People are confused about, at least in the diagnosis side. Starting with kids, a couple of people are wondering, how early can you diagnose a learning disability? Here's a person whose 8-year-old daughter was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia this year. And another one who thinks her 6-year-old might have ADHD isn't sure. Another person who says, her daughter was evaluated in the first grade and told that she did not have dyslexia. She had ADHD, but it's more and more obvious that she does have dyslexia and dysgraphia problems now that she's in 4th grade. What's the timeline for having learning disabilities become diagnosable, if you will?
Yeah. There are early childhood tools for children who are what I would call more severe and most severe. I think I'm going to give you my professional opinion and then give a couple references. The first thing I would respond to of my professional opinion is that I think the first thing is figuring out whether the characteristics that you see are characteristics of the environment, are characteristics of other things. We know that other elements, stress and anxiousness and anxiety, etc., can all play into thinking that someone has ADHD or LD. So the first thing I always tell parents, and I get a lot of calls from parents and grandparents, and I say, what are you seeing? Where do you think those things are coming from? What have you tried to do to change those things little by little, not all at once? And does it work? Does it continue to plague that child or keep that child in that level of frustration? I am not a preschool diagnostician, so we don't do, in my private practice, we don't do preschool diagnosis, but I know for those that are probably most severe to moderately severe, where things are really impacting, that there are pediatric diagnosis that's been very good. Different hospitals have them, different neuropsychs have them. So I think you have to do some evaluation of what are you seeing, and is it a condition that can be moved through a little bit, one step at a time, or when you do certain things, does it still just exist and it doesn't go away? The other thing that I think is absolutely critical is making sure that you don't start too late. So we say early childhood diagnosis is important, and LDA has an early childhood committee that is working hard on what the research is saying and what they should be sharing with the field. So if you check the website on a regular basis, you'll see some things on LD, early childhood. Now, again, this is my professional opinion. And that is that if a child has learning disabilities, that child has a right to be reevaluated every 3 years in school. If you are reevaluated every 3 years in school and the evaluator is not, some evaluators they're great evaluators, but they just don't smile. They don't present themselves very well. They're evaluators, psychologists, school psychologists, and clinical psychologists. So if that child consistently goes through those things without really strong support, he or she's going to believe that there's something seriously wrong. That doesn't mean that you should not do assessment early on if you see things that are very concerning to you. But I think I would sit and chat with an evaluator that was specialized in the area, the age that your child's in.
So I think the answer then to the person who's the people who are saying that their child was not diagnosed early on and they're thinking 3 years later that, should they be reevaluated, sounds like the answer is yes, definitely. Every 3 years or so, it sounds like it's worth redoing.
Yes, yes, you're right, Susan. Thank you for filling that in. What the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act allows for is early childhood services. So those children that are really exhibiting characteristics and symptoms, and there's true concern there, that early childhood services are available for all types of disabilities, including LD and ADHD. And then as a school child, the IDEA, as we abbreviate it, is also has a mandate that every 3 years a child be reevaluated. That doesn't always mean
interesting.
That doesn't always mean a full evaluation, but where's the child? Have the things that we've done been progressive? Are we seeing improvement, et cetera? So there was part of that question that had an 8-year-old. If that 8-year-old hasn't had a diagnosis and you've been seeing the same patterns, that would be something that I would investigate. Perhaps they need a diagnosis.
Okay. Just for clarification, who are the professionals that best diagnose learning disabilities?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. The three professional areas that I look to are school psychologists, because they work for the schools, and in all states, as far as I know. I'm going to say all, and then there's probably something that negates that. But I believe in all states, schools are responsible to provide services, assessment services, and the school psychologists do that. Neuropsychologists, which are going to look at all of the areas that we talked about on the slide of criteria, but they're going to look at it in a little bit different way. They're going to bring things together, tie things together. So they'll look at attention and concentration and tell you whether that's a visual attention or an auditory attention or both, and they'll look at reading and writing and all those things, and they'll bring it together that is a little bit different write-up, and sometimes better. By the way, some insurances will cover neuropsychs, but not cover clinical psychs, and some insurances will cover both, and some insurances will cover none. And then the other one is clinical psychologists. In any or all of these cases, I would have an interview with the person that I'm thinking of using and make sure that they have the right tools and are professionally trained for the age range that you're looking at. So there are some that do just children, and they're not very good with adults, and vice versa.
How about schools? Are schools, a number of people have posted already that their school refused to evaluate their child for LD or didn't find LD, and is it the norm to have to go outside the school system to get diagnosis? Do people have to go privately? I guess is the question.
Yeah, we would like to say no. That'd be the first thing that we'd like to say. In most states, there's a protocol that is a formal protocol where a parent goes to the special education director or the school district and files a request in writing. And as soon as that request is filed in writing, again, going back to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that request has to be met within a certain number of days. So if you are a parent and you are talking to the teacher in the special education program or in the general education program, and you're saying, I really would like to see my child diagnosed, I'd like to know what's going on, and they say, oh no, I don't think you need to do that. We've got some other things that we're putting into place, like certain approaches, certain methods, sometimes referred to as response to intervention. You have a right, if you're really concerned, you have a right to fill out the form. And I would tell you the name of the form, but I'm concerned that every state names their forms differently. So there is a form that you can ask for from administration of special education, either at the district level or at your local school level. And you fill that out and you ask for your child to be evaluated for learning disabilities. Now, schools don't do evaluations for ADHD, typically. The school psychologists are not always trained to do that. And ADHD is a medical diagnosis that falls under your medical doctor, psychiatrist, yes, clinical psychologists and neuropsychologists, but ADHD would be going outside the school, getting the diagnosis, then coming back to the school and asking for appropriate services. Learning disabilities, you should be able to get it from the school. If you get it, if you get a diagnosis, an assessment, and you're not satisfied with it, you can go back to the school and you can ask for an external evaluation. You'll have to file another form, of course, and once that is approved, then the school will typically, can I say typically, and we'll hope that all will do this, but the school will typically provide, will provide the cost, will cover the cost of that. And they usually have a list of providers in the community that they give you, and you can do your interviewing and such.
Okay, that's really helpful. There's some confusion here, at least from one person, and I suspect she's not alone, between ADD and LD. So here's her story. Her child was evaluated by the school and declared not to have a learning disability. She then took the child to a private clinic, an ADHD clinic, where she was diagnosed with ADD. And the mother is feeling that there's a contradiction between those two conclusions. I think perhaps there's a confusion, as I think what you just said is very helpful. You know, ADD is a medical diagnosis. It's not one that schools make. Learning disabilities is an educational diagnosis, and perhaps clarifying that would help this person who's thinking that there's a contradiction between a statement that her child doesn't have an LD and a different statement that she does have ADD. That's not contradictory, correct?
That is not contradictory, because you can have, these are two separate disabilities. If everybody just looked at their left hand and right hand and said, in my left hand I have ADHD or ADD, and in my right hand I have LD, the two are not the same. As I went through the earlier slides, there are differences in each, and the symptoms and behaviors are different. So if I were in that person's position, it sounds like we have a diagnosis of ADD, but there's some concern that LD is underlying the ADD, and so I would fill out the form I would find out which form I needed to fill out, and I would request. And again, remember, once you request, then the school is obligated to follow with a specific number of days. And I will tell you that LDA's website will have some of this information, and then the education, government education, Department of Education website, if you were to go on and Google IDEA or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, you would see all of those things, including the time frames and all the steps.
We, on Attitude Magazine's website, we also have a sample letter to request an evaluation. I'll find the URL and post that to the list. A couple of people, one an adult and one a parent of a child, have asked a similar question. So let me ask this one to you. In both cases, they say that one the adult and one the child are taking medication for ADD, and they're wondering if that's going to help their learning problems because maybe increased focus with the ADHD medication will help address some of the underlying what appears to be reading dyslexia problems. Would you want to comment on that?
It's my understanding. Now you're kind of in the neuropsych and medical side, but it is my understanding after 30-some years in this field that if the treatment assists learning because the individual is able to concentrate and focus, is not as distractible, able to put some strategies in place, and learning begins to occur, then a learning disability is more than likely not present. If the treatment allows concentration and focus and minimizes distraction, but academics or skills at work or different things that you're trying to learn or that your child's trying to learn are not coming up to a level that you think is acceptable or that is what would be called grade level for children and peer level for coworkers and work environment, then the chance that there is a learning disability should be identified. I mean, I can't say that it's there, it's not there, but the medication is not going to take away the learning disability. The medication will assist in leveling out concentration. In most cases, some cases it doesn't, but medication assists in those things, which then allows a much higher level of functioning and learning.
Number of questions relate to what schools can do to help kids with learning disabilities. What actually can a parent expect? And also, I might add, some adults on the webinar have also said, is there anything that can be done for me now that I realize in my 50s that I have an underlying language disability? Is it really worth trying to address it at this point? So two separate questions, but again, I guess the underlying question is, what are the therapies or treatments for learning disabilities, either in school or as an adult?
I'm going to go really off, not off the record, but again, I'll use my professional belief. I have a very strong belief that we need to teach all children, not just children in special education, not just children with LD or ADHD, but we need to teach them in accordance with their strengths. Some of you, as you're out there, you're taking notes. Some of you are listening because you can go on and get that podcast, or you can watch the webinar again. Some of you are thinking about what is happening, what the questions are addressing, and how that might affect your next steps. We all learn differently. And one of the things that I believe that we could do better in school environments and school situations is to help young people really understand, children from elementary, preschool, elementary, all the way through high school, really understand how they learn, what works best for them, how they can switch something that is exacerbating the learning disability to a different way. So if I have a writing disorder, maybe I go to my teacher and say, I don't want to write this out, but I could give a short presentation, or I could do a PowerPoint. Middle school, even upper elementary school, kids can do things like that nowadays. So I always feel like we have this kind of lack of understanding of how individuals learn from preschool all the way through adult. And my concern is that when we try to put everybody in the same box, and I don't think anybody does this on purpose. We're certainly not saying that schools are trying to harm children at all. They're trying to do the best job they know how. But I think when we kind of put the same methods and the same approaches across the board, that doesn't always work. I also know, after my years of being in this field and my interaction with LDA, that most successful methods of learning are hands-on demonstration, illustration, being able to talk about it, do it, build it, and then read about it. And I think if some of you are into reading about our early philosophers in education, John Dewey said that we should be out in the community learning and then bringing that information back to the classroom, no matter what the age, and having the discussion about that. What did we learn and how did we learn it? So it's the application. So that would be the area for children. When you get into high school and adult settings, you have what's called the opportunity for accommodations. And that could be that you're taking a test and you need extra time. You're writing a report and you need drag in naturally speaking so that you can talk to the computer and it'll print it all in there for you. It could be that you need a sophisticated spell check or edit check. There are all sorts of apps and accommodations that really help people. What I find is that many people do feel that if they use those, or they say they need those of employers, or even in high school, that they feel, middle school and high school, they feel that they're cheating, and they don't want to be different, and they don't want to impose on anybody. So I think there's a logical point where you go from remediation in a strengths-based approach to accommodations with still some remediation.
Can you advise the listeners of your point of view on telling or asking an employer about ADHD or LD? There was one person on the webinar who's posted that they desperately need a diagnosis of ADHD so they won't lose their job. Mm-hmm. And I think as far as I know, getting a diagnosis is not going to protect their job, but perhaps you have a point of view on that.
Right. Let me just give you some steps that are really important. I'm glad one person asked. I'm sure others have the same question. The first thing is that if you are an adult or a high school person, high school age in the junior, senior level, you are eligible for what's called, or you may be, I shouldn't say you are, but you may be eligible for what's called vocational rehabilitation services. And they're kind of called different things in different states, but you'll find vocational rehabilitation services. And in fact, if you go on the web, LDA's website, you'll see one piece on Rehab Services Administration, which is at the federal level, and then it gives you the links to get to the state piece. So if you don't have insurance or resources that will cover diagnosis of ADHD or LD, one of the things that you can do is go to the rehab service. It's a state service funded by state and federal monies, and you can ask for assistance. Contrary to popular belief, they provide assistance in transition from high school to the next level. They provide assistance for people who are employed who are in fear of losing their job, and they provide assistance for people who wish to have training with the goal of becoming employed. If you don't want to become employed, that's not the place to go. For the person who asked that question, that would be my first step. The second step then is to go not to anybody in your division or department or person, but go to the human resource person. That may be the person who writes the paychecks. In my private practice, I'm the one who people would come to and ask because we're small. So we don't have a separate person. In mid-sized to larger companies, you'd have a human resource person that would be about disabilities and disclosure of disabilities. And then your next step would be to disclose to that person. And when I help people disclose, I always say, your disclosure is confidential by law. There's an Americans with Disabilities Act that prevents an employer from sharing that information with anyone else. And you should know enough that you can say to the HR person, I'm coming to you with a confidential matter, and I know that you are not going to share this with anyone else because the law doesn't allow you to. And then that's where you would disclose. The one thing that happens with individuals with disabilities and work environments is that it's your responsibility to disclose, and it's also your responsibility to know what you would need for accommodations. And sometimes people say things that are unreasonable. They make recommendations that are unreasonable. So I'm sure this group that we're here on, Attitude, I'm also sure that LDA and other sites will have information about what's reasonable and how to do that. So that would be the steps. First step would be see if you're eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. It's not hard. It's not an entitlement program, but they do work with people with disabilities who are seeking work, are in work, maybe thinking they're going to lose their job, etc. And then talk to your HR person. And your vocational rehab counselor will help you with the conversation with your HR person also.
Okay. I just want to come back to the remedial steps, which you mentioned when I asked, how could learning disabilities be addressed in school, that one of the key things was understanding the way you learn and using those learning techniques, which I think make enormous sense. Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learning and so forth? But are there, in fact, remediation techniques that can be done in school? I'm thinking of my own daughter's dyslexia. When it was diagnosed, I think in the 7th grade, she went through 2 years of intensive phonics training, some of which took place in school and some of which we hired an external tutor for. Are there other, is that a good example? And it did indeed make a big difference in her ability to read. Are there other programs that take place either in school or out of school that parents should look for their children's learning disabilities?
Yes, and that's an excellent example. I'm glad, Susan, that you shared that because there are some baseline things that sometimes children particularly don't get a good handle on, and if you don't take care of those things, then you just don't move forward. It's always a dilemma, and it's always a struggle. There are a number of programs that are out there, and I'm not going to list one, because if I list one, I'm going to miss 7. But there are a number of programs that are out there that are done by private practitioners. The programs have strong research behind them. If you are looking for an outside the school resource to supplement what you're doing in the school, one of the major things you want is to make sure that the program that you choose or the person that you choose with their knowledge and skills is backed by research. We have a whole lot of stuff out there that people have developed and say, I can cure dyslexia, and I'm sorry, you can't cure dyslexia. Just be careful. You don't want to get into that quagmire, if you will. So there are a number of programs that have been developed that are well researched and stand. And there are a number of schools around the country, whether they're public schools or private schools, who understand how children learn. There's a whole plethora of universal design through CAST, C-A-S-T. If you just Google C-A-S-T, you'll come to that. All sorts of curricula and remediation techniques, but using a design that meets more than just one methodology of learning. Not every teacher's trained. Not everyone understands, but if you as a parent do some of that research and then you share it in a nice way, I know you're all nice, but you know what I mean. If you share it in a nice way with the teachers and say, can we work together on this? Can you do some of this? I'll do some of this at home. You'll find that you'll get further.
If phonics tutoring is helpful for dyslexia, and I think it is, I mean, is there something similar for math problems? Is there a known remediation program that schools can be asked to put in place to help children who have dyscalculia?
There are different math programs. As far as I know, the last research that I did, those math programs they're based for children with learning disabilities and with dyscalculia. They don't go past pre-algebra. I keep asking different people who are developers in these fields and asking them if they have things that go into algebra. There's a gentleman who has written a number of books, he and his wife actually. One of his books is several years old now, maybe 10 or 15 years old, but it's absolutely excellent. His name is Cecil Mercer, M-E-R-C-E-R. And that would be a book that any parent could benefit from because it covers not just math, but methods in reading and writing and interaction, social interaction, etc. And there's other books that are out there too, but that one is one that's on our shelf that we use a lot.
Okay. Two people, Marion and Andrea, bring up something that I find really interesting. Their children are diagnosed with ADHD, and they're being told by the school that that does not qualify them for an IEP or a 504 plan because they don't have a learning disability. And they're both feeling that they're being the school's just passing them along because they think they can. And they're wondering, you know, how to proceed given the school's resistance to special accommodations for children who are only diagnosed with ADHD and not with a learning disability.
That's an excellent question because ADHD is considered to be a disability in all the books, so to speak, all the research, and many children have a 504 plan for ADHD. The 504 plan doesn't include the need for remediation or for extra assistance in different subject matter. Although if the ADHD has prevented until treatment became stabilized, diagnosis and then treatment, if that's prevented a child from being at grade level, then there should at least be some remediation, some approaches. It might not be called an IEP, but there should be a plan in place. If I were in either of those folks' shoes, I would go to the district level and I would ask why the child is not identified as a child with a disability and why we don't have at least a 504 plan in place.
As I understand the IEP law, it does specifically not specifically state ADHD. And I think, tell me if this is right, and I agree with you that our families with kids with ADHD are much more likely to successfully get a 504 plan. But the ones who have gotten IEP plans, I believe, have done so under the clause other conditions which keep the child from succeeding in school. It's hard to document, but I think there is a clause in the law which does, if you can document the extent to which ADHD is keeping your child from learning successfully, I think it can qualify the child for an IEP. It's a higher barrier for sure, I think.
Thanks, Susan. I'm not aware of all the little pieces, so thank you for
it's a tough one, but it is a clause sort of that says other health conditions, is I believe the phrase. So you'll have to, and someone asked, should I get a lawyer? And probably the answer to that is yes, or an advocate of some kind.
At least an advocate.
Right. I wanted to ask you about RTI. I think you mentioned it, and there's a question here from Stacy who says, with the installation of RTI in high schools, do you feel children and young adults will, one, know they have AD or LD or an ADHD, and two, be able to articulate this? Have you seen any ramifications of RTI in school systems? I'm not sure what RTI is. Does this...
Yeah, RTI is, and I know just enough information to be dangerous. This is where I have full disclosure. We all know some parts of our areas really well and other parts sort of. But RTI is response to intervention. And what typically should happen is a child who is behind grade level should be working with a remediation program of some sort that is done by the school and is focused on those areas that the child is behind in. If that doesn't work, then the parent, after a reasonable period of time, you can't just do it for 3 weeks and go, it's not working. But if that doesn't work, then the parent has a right to ask for the diagnosis and say, okay, we've tried RTI, let's go to the next level and make sure that we're not missing a learning disability. In many cases, in good school districts, RTI is very successful because it gives some one-to-one or small group interaction and remediation, and it allows children to lose some of the anxiety about learning in front of a whole class and with a whole group of peers, and helps them move forward. I don't know that RTI all by itself would work in every situation. Depends on which programs and whether those programs actually meet the strengths and learning needs of that particular child. So you may supplement that with some tutoring or some other system.
Okay, great. I just wanted to note that Brenda, who's on the webinar, has posted a tip for people with parents of kids with math problems. She said Hands-On Math is an absolutely great app for iPads or iPhones. Makes a huge difference for kids who are hands-on learners. So, there's so many great apps out there now. And we did do a webinar, by the way, I wanted to tell the audience, some months ago, and you'd find it on our iPad, our webinar page, which was simply about apps for learning. And it was extremely interesting. Everybody online chimed in with their favorite ones, and we listed them also.
Great.
I recommend, that's a new breakthrough, I think, for people who are trying to remediate math and reading and other problems. So thank you so much, Nancie. This was really great. And everyone, I cannot tell you how wonderful Learning Disabilities Association is. They are just a fabulous resource, and please check out their website. So join us again. Thank you so much, Nancie, and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.